Hi friends, Ben Ochart here. Thank you for tuning in. I thought I'd talk with you a little bit about nitrates while I do a water change on this tank here. It's filling up. Help me keep an eye on it, because if you do things while you're doing water changes, chances are you're going to flood your floor. Ask me how I know. So I have 5 tips for you on how to control and lower your nitrates. My last comment is probably going to shock you a little bit, so stay tuned for that. So what the heck are nitrates? Let's start with something real basic. As your fish produce ammonia, right? You feed them and their waste turns into ammonia. Food that's rotting in the aquarium, rotting plants, anything that is sitting in the aquarium that is waste, it's going to produce ammonia as it decays. That decay, that ammonia is then converted into nitrite by a certain kind of bacteria in the aquarium, and then that nitrite is going to be turned into nitrate by another kind of bacteria. This is why it's so important to have that bacteria in your aquarium when you start off a tank, right? The ammonia and the nitrite are very, very toxic to your fish, and if they get ammonia poisoning or nitrite poisoning, they're going to be in real bad shape. So you want that bacteria in there doing the work, converting it to the less toxic nitrate. There's a lot of talk about what are safe nitrate levels, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let me give you these 5 tips on lowering the nitrates. If you're getting nitrates that are up in the 80s, 80 parts per million, 100 parts per million, you need to change something. Would I suggest that you worry? Not necessarily. But let's talk about it. Tip number one is feed less. Most of us, let's be honest, most of us love feeding our fish. It's fun, we love watching them eat, but in many cases, we're feeding them too much. Cut back and watch your fish, see how they do. Chances are you can feed them less. Some people feed their fish 3-4 times a week. Some people feed them once a day. Some people feed their fish 2 or 3 times a day. All right, but dial it in and feed them a little less, and you'll see your nitrates actually start to lower a bit, because you're producing less waste. There's less ammonia, less nitrite, and ultimately less nitrates. So feed a little bit less. Now, a pro tip for you is you can feed less with higher quality food. And what I mean by that is if you have foods that are more nutrient rich, more bioavailable, if you will, you can get away by feeding less, and the fish will get more nutrition because they're not wasting a lot of time trying to move unbeneficial fillers and dyes and junk through their system. So high quality food is going to allow you to feed less and provide high quality nutrition and ultimately produce less ammonia. This is getting close to the top. Let me turn off the water and we'll continue. Tip number 2, obvious, and what I was just doing here. Swap out water that is high in nitrates with water that has no nitrates. That's called your water change. For some of you, you'll do an 80% water change. Some of you do a 30% water change. Well, a couple tips. One, every time you change water, you're probably going to stress your fish a little bit. There's going to be some shifts in pH. It's unavoidable. So just don't overdo it, but don't not do it. Because when you add fresh water, you're adding minerals. And those minerals, this calcium, magnesium in particular, buffer nitric acid. And that's what nitrate is. It's nitric acid. Those minerals help to buffer that. And without those minerals, that nitric acid can get pretty high, and you can have a pH crash and a big problem in your aquarium. So do your water changes, and here's a pro tip: check your faucet, check the water coming out of your faucet. If you have nitrates in your water source, you're going to need to do a greater than a 50% water change to make any difference at all in your aquarium. I have some videos on that. I'll try and find them, maybe post them above this video here, give you a link. But you really don't get anywhere if you're adding water with nitrates in it. So do test your tap. Make sure that you're just not adding more nitrate contaminated water to your aquarium. But swapping out nitrate high water with zero nitrate water, an obvious way to reduce nitrates. Point number 3 is also a bit obvious, less stock. Don't have a tank that's so crowded that it's just a constantly producing tons and tons of waste. Cut back the stock a little bit. Of course, some of us who keep cichlids like to heavily stock because we feel it spreads the aggression around and makes it less likely for one fish to get picked out and destroyed. But more stock means more waste. More waste means you need to do more water changes. So dial it in accordingly, right? A lot of moving parts. It's a fluid situation, like I've said a lot of times, but less stock will create less nitrates. Point number 4, another obvious one for a lot of you, is the use of plants. Aquariums of plants, like my planted 55-gallon, require less water changes and can go for a couple of weeks with just top-offs because the plants are loving that ammonia, they're loving the nitrates, and it is what they consume. They're a nutrient for the plants. So planted aquariums don't need as much and will control nitrates naturally. Again, in aquariums where you have fish that are plant destroyers, like your bigger cichlids, it's a little bit hard to do that. You can put plants like pothos and things like that coming out of a hang-on back filter or in a sump if you're up to doing that. If you're not going to have any choice except to do a lot of water changes. But plants are a great way to help control nitrates. You know, you can always go the chemical route. There are pads, there are additives you can add to your aquarium that reduce nitrates. I don't necessarily like or encourage or suggest those kinds of things. I think you're better off either adding plants, stocking less, feeding less, or doing more frequent water changes. I don't like to try and change things chemically in the aquarium. There is one thing that might work, and I'll show it to you. This is an example of what is called an algae scrubber, and this one comes from my friends over at Santa Monica Filtration. And some of you have heard of algae scrubbers, and what it is, it's a way to harness the nitrate consuming and ammonia consuming properties of algae. It uses algae to your advantage. Whether you want to reduce the algae in the aquarium, whether you want to harvest algae to feed it to your fish, like if you have plecos, or there are lots of fish that like algae. But this is an algae scrubber, and this goes on the inside of the aquarium. You can see it has all of this is area that algae can grow on. And this hangs on the outside of the aquarium, and these are lights that are of the perfect frequency to promote algae growth. So this is on the outside of the aquarium, this is on the inside of the aquarium. The powerful magnets hold it together. It takes a few weeks for it to start to show algae on the inside. Once it really starts to get full of algae, you would clean it every 2 weeks. You'd pull it out and give it a little scrub down and pop it back in. That will help to keep your nitrates down because the ammonia, right, which converts into nitrate, is being consumed by the algae. You run an airline, it has an airline, and a bubbler back here, so you're getting a little bit of oxygen being produced in the aquarium through surface tension breakup. But you run bubbles through it, and that helps the algae to grow and be nutrition, be healthy. And I'll show in a different video the installation of this and how it's working out in the reduction of nitrates. Now, my final comment for you, and this might come as a little bit of a surprise. Don't worry so much about nitrates. I've come across some research that shows that nitrates as high as 1,000 parts per million were not necessarily impacting the fish in a horrible way. I am not recommending that you allow your tanks to get to 1,000 parts per million. What I am saying is, if you see them at 40, if you see them creeping up to 80, don't panic. okay? It's okay. Do a water change and just make sure that you're on top of it. But realize that you're probably not affecting your fish too negatively, even at that higher level. But stay on top of it and realize that every aquarium is different and every type of fish is different. Some fish have a very low tolerance for nitrates. If you're keeping, let's say, something more sensitive, maybe stingrays, right? Maybe jellyfish, maybe seahorses. I mean, there are some fish that are going to react very poorly to nitrates. Discus, perhaps. Okay, so you have to stay on top of it. But certainly water changes are going to be really, really important. Now, one last pro tip. If you do a big water change, realize that the water in your aquarium over time, especially if you're keeping buffering substrates, things like crushed coral, aragonite, over time the pH in your aquarium might have shifted and now is different from the water coming out of your tap. So if you do a 90% water change and you flood that aquarium with water very quickly, you may shock your fish with the pH shift. So if you're doing a big water change, I'm talking those big 70 to 90% water changes, let the water come in a little slower. Let the fish kind of have a little chance to kind of adapt to it, and you'll find that your fish are in less stress after a water change. If I had $1 for every time someone's sent me an email or commented under one of my videos, just did a water change, my fish are not doing well, they're gasping, they're down the corner, they're tipping over, chances are you gave them a big pH shock. So keep that in mind when you're doing water changes. All right, those are my tips for nitrates, and hope you find them helpful. Comment below if you have some more, and thank you so much for watching. You are appreciated. I'll see you on Saturday at the Cichlids and Coffee live stream every Saturday at 11 a.m. Central. Great group of fish keepers get together for an hour, talk about everything from food to fish to filters. And if you'd like to help the channel, become a Patreon Garage Gang Patreon supporter. Starts for as little as $3 a month. Details are in the description below. And the best way you can help the channel is to watch the videos, like the videos in this playlist right here, my best tips, and to subscribe and hit that bell. You can subscribe by hitting me down here on the mug, and you'll be subscribed to the channel. Thank you for watching, my friends. You are appreciated. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.